So today I'm going to talk about Discrimination and Disparities by Thomas Sowell. We're going to talk about chapter 2, which is on discrimination itself. So first of all, we have to know what is discrimination. We hear this term a lot, but Thomas Sowell explained it in, compartmentalize it into two different forms of discrimination. The first one is the difference, discern differences in quality of people and things and choosing accordingly. So this is the normal everyday, where you choose an orange juice, apple juice, rice and noodles. That's the kind of discrimination that we do on a daily basis. And then the second one is the one that we are more familiar with, is the evil kind of discrimination, mistreating people or treating people badly based on arbitrary factors like racism, sexism. Okay, so this kind of discrimination is what is usually result in the anti-discrimination laws, which we will talk about a little bit later. Okay, so discrimination one is I would say like the better kind of discrimination. Is not so simple as just choosing between a thing or two. There are actually another two kinds of discrimination in this one. So discrimination one, we have the type A, which is the ideal discrimination, which is what we think of like normally treating people. You treat people based on an evidence, like on an individual basis. You do it on, that's what colleges do when they admit you, or like what jobs, what workplace actually hiring people. That's what they do, ideal discrimination. Okay, and the second one is the less ideal version. And this one is generalized discrimination. It's kind of like based on groups evidence or based on stereotypes. And we have some examples of this. Okay, so the discrimination 1A is the ideal kind. In the books, Thomas Sowell given examples of a professor who may in his class would treat every single student in his class as an individual, as a person with their hopes and dreams and their own identity. But when that professor is going home alone or like walking, let's say like at 10 p.m. on a sidewalk, and he sees someone in a hoodie or sees someone look shady, he probably gonna cross the street and not, try to avoid meeting that person. So that is discrimination B. That professor doesn't really care about who that person is as a person or as an individual. You just discriminate and assume that is a bad person. Okay, so what is the rationale behind that 1B, which is arguably could be a bad kind of discrimination, but what's the rationale behind it? Is that, first of all, there's an economic cost to everything. So for example, the cost of walking alone at night. You don't know if that person is a good person, who knows? But it doesn't matter because the cost of offending that person is not equal to the cost of potentially getting mugged or robbed or killed. So that's a rationale that what people may think when they do this kind of discrimination. So in workplace, in jobs, let's say in nursing, majority of people or workers are women. So nurses, like 90% are women. So you see not a lot of male nurses, and higher employers may look at this and see that they know that, okay, if you introduce male into this this job, there's a potential that it could be not very productive because we know biology exists, and like people may do something or like be attracted to each other, which is, we don't know, but this is a potential reason why people may discriminate on this 1B basis. Another one is based on just simply generalization and stereotype. And if any of you have done or like look at car insurance, you're gonna know, I've never crashed a car. I have a very responsible driver. For some reason, I still have to pay like $4,000 a year because people in my age range, so 20 years old, is like prone to be like that. So I just got discriminated upon by these insurance company, even though I didn't do anything wrong. But in their rationale, it is an easy way to compartmentalize people and just avoid this kind of like deeper scrutiny. Okay. And so why does this difference matter? Because when we talk about economics or when we talk about discrimination, it's very easy to what's it called? Putting you attributing the wrong reason to discrimination and disparities. Okay, so Thomas Sowell addressed it in his book. He said that there's a myth in like the poor pay more, which is not really a myth. It's actually true. People in the ghetto or like in like poor neighborhood is actually paying more money, and they're getting less. But this is not because of discrimination two. Discrimination two is the evil, what we talk about. Discrimination that you actually hate someone, like bigotry and racism, sexism. Because it's more, people may say that it's price gouging, it's the greedy store owners. But it's not really that reason. It could just simply be discrimination one. Okay, and we can see this in the LA riot of 1992. If you look up videos, you can see that there are some people who say the Korean town, it was like a very like turmoil race kind of like problem back then. But some people say that they hate the Koreans because they charge too much money and they are greedy. Okay, so those people are actually distributing the higher price with like evil, greedy store owner when that's not the case at all. And I'm not going to go over too much because it's in Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. He also explained this already. Okay, so now I get to the fun part. So we're going to talk about capitalism and the cost of discrimination. So a usual Marxist or like criticism of capitalism is what? What you always hear is exploitation. We always hear is, what's the second one? Exploitation and alienation, right? Okay, so even the shocking facts I don't think a lot of people know is that even Adam Smith, the so-called father of capitalism, knew about these things. He even called it out and he said he doesn't really have a good look at capitalism. He said that on alienation, he said that when you go into this kind of like making a needle, this kind of specialization actually result in more stupid people. That's what he wrote in his book. And of course, there is no good intention in capitalism. This is the core ideas of it. There's no good intention at all. The baker does not bake the bread, the bread simply because he cares about his neighbor. He bakes bread because the bread is gonna give him money, and people, a society, gain something out of him simply as kind of like a side effects. Okay. So why am I talking about this? Because capitalism sounds pretty bad. It sounds pretty incompassionate. It doesn't sound like you're helping people. But then then it relates to discrimination in this fact. Is that this is my favorite quote from Thomas Sowell? Is that capitalism only knows one color. That color is green. All else is necessarily subservient to it: race, gender, ethnicity. Okay. So why do I bring this point up? Because sometimes you see people say some things like, oh, to be anti-racist, you have to be anti-capitalism or something like that, which is not really true. If you say that capitalism is evil or like, dehumanizing, I can see you have a point. But when you say it's create discrimination, that's not really true. And here's why. Okay, so in Africa, there was the apartheid system, right, which it was racist and basically discriminate against Black. Okay, but in the books, Thomas Sowell point out a very interesting phenomenon, is that why South African in more competitive industry often hire more Blacks than they were legally allowed to. In some other industry, Blacks even outnumber white, where it's not even legal for them to do so. Okay, and many non-whites, so they have white-only area segregation, kind of like America. And there are actually Blacks living in non-white area, in white-only area, including Walter A. Williams. He's the white-only areas he's the another economist who is very similar to Thomas Sowell. Okay, so that is in terms of labor. Okay, so Black people are actually, capitalists for some reason are actually hiring Black people despite the fact that they're supposed to be racist and they're supposed to hate Black people. And they actually vote laws that ban Black people from joining this area. Okay, and now let's get to America. America has the same thing. But Thomas Sowell pointed out very interesting facts is that before Jim Crow laws and before these discrimination laws were passed, Blacks and white would sit wherever they wanted. And many municipal transit was privately owned and relied on the number of passengers, not on anything else. So the more people you get on your bus, the more you get paid. Okay, so they have an incentive to not discriminate against Black for two reasons. Because one, you can offend Blacks for the fact that you are treating them differently. And the second reason is that it could offend white people who are unhappy with the fact that they're empty seat, but they are reserved only for Blacks. Okay, and so in the capitalist view, this is very complicated and less profitable for them. Okay, so why do they defy these laws when they're supposed to be racist? And the interesting fact is that, like here, there is no compelling evidence that white employers violating these laws have different racial views. So these are still racist white people. They are still, they're still bigots or whatever. But for some reason, they still defy laws to hire Black people. So the reason is that employers who fail to hire Black workers have to pay a cost that we don't really see, a cost that people don't really think about, is that when you try to discriminate, you are essentially losing money that you have to pay in some form or other. In the form of labors, you have to pay for higher price if you want to like hire, let's say, white people. Or in the case of customer, you are essentially isolating a big chunk of your customer base. Okay. So this could be a case against the government monopoly on things, because Thomas Sowell pointed out the facts that companies that are government controlled, that are monopolies like public utilities, price and profit are regulated by government. They are insulated from this cost of discrimination. They essentially do not bear the cost at all. So the rate is fixed. There is no reason for them to be efficient in saving costs at all. And an example he gave is AT&T. He gave the examples that for some reason, as time passed, there are more Black people working in industries. But for this particular industry, which is government owned, for some reason, Black employment actually decreased in the South. And okay, so the Black employment actually decreased in the South, despite the fact that they have all kind of system, regardless of the North or the South. They have the same kind of hiring policy and all that stuff. Okay, so and another interesting, very weird stuff is that this also happened in non-profit organizations such as academics, hospital, and foundations. And Blacks and Jews were discriminated against before World War II until people start to see that Hitler was really like this vile monster, a racist monster. And even Professor Milton Friedman here, like I guess most of us know who he is, my second favorite economist after Sowell. He was also discriminated against. He wasn't hired until after World War II in the University of Chicago, because Blacks and Jews was not very looked at upon very nicely in place that don't really have an incentive for profits. Okay, and so those were like the evil capitalists somehow unintentionally actually helping against discrimination and disparities. But now here are some of the good intentions that's supposed to help people that actually create more disparity and discrimination. So this is what Thomas Sowell pointed out: discrimination laws, something called the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So they actually sue several employers who carry out background checks on ground of discriminations, despite the facts that it's done on every applicant. And here's a very interesting fact, is that employers tend to discriminate against Black people based on discrimination 1B. So based on stereotypes, based on general discrimination on groups. But when they actually carry out a background check, so this is when it's mandatory, they have to do it, Black people are essentially tend to be hired more if there is a background check. But for some reason, the government is thinking that, okay, it should be illegal to do this because you are essentially doing some kind of like racial profiling, or you are doing this kind of discrimination against Black. But they don't understand that the statistics show that when you do background check, Black people are actually more prone to get employed. Okay, so that's the first discrimination laws. And this is the, okay. Where is it? And this is a minimum wage laws, which is the thing that really I'm real passionate about. And what really got me into all of this economic stuff is minimum wage laws, okay? And so when we think of minimum wage laws, we think that it's actually helping people, helping the poor people, or helping, you know, the people who need it the most. Okay, but here's some really strange things. So in 1948, okay, so let's go back a little bit. In 1938, they passed the Fair Labor Act, which include minimum wage and like workers' right and all that stuff. Okay, all that stuff was by 1938. But this is the unemployment rate in 1948. Something you can see that for blacks and white in the same age range, teenagers, they have virtually the same unemployment rate. Okay, 9.4, 10.2, and black here is 10.5 and 9.4. Okay, the same employment rate. So because by 1948, there was been a war going on, so there's a lot of inflation. So minimum wage was essentially useless. There was no reason for it to help or like have any effect. But what happened when they actually raising minimum wage? So every president after that raised minimum wage. Every term they raise minimum wage, especially Democrats. Republicans tend to do it once, but Democrats tend to do it twice if they get reelected. Okay, so unemployment rate. So this is something very interesting. If you look at 1972, 1980s, all the stuff, okay, you see that unemployment rate for black is significantly higher. It's double or more than double, okay? And here is the grade from that time period. So you notice something very interesting here. From 1880, 1900, 1920, 1940, you notice something? The unemployment rate is almost identical until after 1940, essentially when minimum wage caught on. There was this kind of divergence where African American gets more unemployment, while the white get relatively very low unemployment. Okay, and so what is the explanation for this? It's easy because of supply and demand. So when you're actually, when you're essentially pushing people to be paid more, okay, paid more, you are essentially putting that quality, you're putting that quantity of jobs offered down, but the quality of talent, you have a surplus of talent, okay? So in this reason, there is no reason. So the cost of discriminating against black essentially go away. Essentially go away because now if you have a base rate anyway, then you're gonna attract a higher number of people to your jobs. And if you're gonna get white people, and let's say this is a racist society or whatever, then there would be no reasons to even hire blacks at all because there is no economic incentive to do so. Okay, so could it be racism that causing this disparity? And Thomas Sowell point out the facts that so the disparity between the unemployment rate was greatest for 16 to 17-year-old age range, less for 18 to 19, and the least in 20 to 24. If there was racism, there would be no reason why there is this trend in the divergence, because a black person would still be black at 16, would still be black at 24. So there is no reason why there is this, what's it called, like not widening gap, but like this closing gap in disparity. So it was actually skill and experience that wasn't important factors in jobs, okay? And because the minimum wage essentially reduced employment prospect for young, inexperienced black teens, this can result in what we see earlier, is that there was this kind of divergence where there was more and more and more and more unemployment for black people. Okay, so that's another examples of why having good intentions to help the people may actually result in discrimination. Okay, so next we have building restriction and housing laws, which is also covered in basic economics. Okay, and so here is to comparison. Early 20th century Harlem. So Harlem back then was predominantly white. They were explicitly very hostile to blacks. They actually didn't want to rent their houses to blacks at all. And they actually, so white people was fleeing because black people were moving in. But a lot of houses was actually, they didn't want to rent it to black people at all. They were explicitly discriminating. This was in 1910, okay? So very racist, very different time. But the thing is that economically, they were operating based on market price, okay? And here we have the second example of late 20th century San Francisco. This is a very heavy liberal leaning, you know, so I can say that arguably they are much less racist than 1910 Harlem. And okay, and but they actually get affected by the 70s housing restriction. See, housing restriction of like zoning laws or like environmental laws and all that stuff, such as, oh, you can only build a building, you know, three level high. You cannot go above, or you cannot build house here and here, other stuff. Those are housing laws. Those are intended to help the environment. Those are intended to help like preserve the beauty of the place or whatever. Okay, so what is actually the result? Okay, San Francisco Bay Area, the liberal, very liberal place. What happened is that when they have that kind of policy get into place, the general population in San Francisco actually grew, and the home price grew three times. That's how much it grew. But for some reason, Black population got cut by more than 50%. Okay, so they cut down from 13.4 to 6.2 in 2010. And they actually, the people behind this San Francisco Bay discrimination, let's say disparity, that is causing losing Black people, they face no economic repercussion at all. Okay, and you can see the graph right here. You see the graph right here is the price keep going up and going up and going up. And a quick Google search show that the median price right now is around like $1,100,000. That's the median house price. You know, a median is not just the higher end. This $1 million is pretty ridiculous. Okay, and okay, so next to Harlem. Now, Harlem was used to be a very racist place. People were actively barring Blacks from entering, but the results show a different thing. The results show that the Black population increased from only 10 to 70% in 20 years, 1910 to 1930. And it's still a majority Black neighborhood today. And it's also the most democratic neighborhood, 82% Democrat and 3% Republican. Okay, so what did we learn from this? Is that even here, the people with good intentions or people who try to help other people or for some reason do not really get the result that we hope for. Okay, because discrimination is costly and irrational in a free market. This is why good and bad intention do not really reflect the economic reality. Okay, like for example, the example of Harlem once again. Okay, the racist people do not want to hire or rent the houses to Black people, but they don't have a choice. They are a landowner, they are bourgeois, whatever, but they do not have a choice. They have to rent it to Black people because else they're gonna lose money. Okay, and economic reality determine the results and the disparities. Okay, so discrimination may not result in disparities, and the good intention from the government may actually do the opposite and create more disparity. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation.